So we're now moving on to the panel discussions for this morning. As I mentioned earlier, we've got 4 fundamental themes for this conference. And the first of them that arguably underpins everything is integrated partners and integrated partnerships. So in this morning's panel sessions, both before coffee and afterwards, we're going to get perspectives from 2 groupings that are absolutely vital to increase the integration, not just strategically, but operationally, to develop our capabilities maximally for what we need. And of course, I'm thinking within industry and I'm thinking across government. Industry will deliver for us, but it's government that will be setting the strategic frameworks. So I'm delighted to welcome the members of the first panel, One Government, One Space. If I can invite panelists to come on stage, and then I will go through introductions more formally. Colleagues, if you'd like to join, please. And could we give them a warm welcome as well? So once again, this session will be chaired by Paul Russell. We'll be having quite a lot of dialogue, discussion and debate, but we will be open once that period is finished to move on into Slido questions. So just introducing the panelists, we've got Paul Russell from the who's Space Delivery Team Leader at Defence Equipment and Support, and Paul is chairing this panel session. We've got Mark Bacon, Deputy Director of Capabilities for the Department of Science, Innovation and Technology. So DSIT is the hosting department for the UK Space Agency. Dr. Matt Broadhead, Chief Consultant for the Space Systems Programme at Dstl. We've got Josh Broom, Head of Space at DBT, the Department for Business and Trade. We've got Melanie Clift, Director of Defence and Security from the Satellite Applications Catapult. And we've got Gnaneswaran, who's the Skynet Senior Responsible Owner for UK Strategic Command. So introductions complete. Paul, over to you, please.
Thank you, Anu. So the way we're going to approach this panel is each of us is going to take 3 or 4 minutes to explain what the subject of the panel means to us, the key things we want to bring out from it. And then after we've all had a go, all the way down there, we're going to open the floor for Q&A. So I'm going to start. And first of all, we recognise that we have to collaborate. One government and one space is not an optional thing. There is a necessity to it. We don't have enough people, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money, skills or facilities to do many things all on our own. So working together is critical, and where possible, dual use capabilities give better value for money for the taxpayer and allow us to use the money we do have to go further. Now, Skynet aside, and we'll hear from Jason in a minute, we're reasonably new to this operating domain. UK Space Command is about 3.5 years old, and we've spent a lot of time trying to get our own houses in order before we seek to work together. But this is now starting to change. Defence and non-defence tasks blur in space, maybe more so than any other operating domain, where there are very few military-only space technologies. For example, we recognise that one person's ISR asset is another person's environmental monitoring tool. We recognise that one person's space debris monitoring solution is another person's tool for managing compliance to UN space law. And it's not just about integration and delivery, it's about integration and operations too. The transactional costs of starting and sustaining work in the space domain are high, and we need to be as efficient as possible. Indeed, as commissioning completes with Tyche, which you've heard about already today, Defence's first operational space-based ISR platform, we're expecting to take tasking from and share imagery with wider government, not just defence customers. So the need to work together is around necessity, but it's also around doing the right thing. There is some policy driving it. So the Space Industrial Plan, we'll hear about that more as we go down the panel. It identified 5 key areas of cooperation. We'll hear about more of them shortly, but we're already sharing and looking for commonality within all of them. Traditional joint programs is one route. Other options, such as one department providing capability to many others, or many departments burden sharing larger problems, exist in parallel. For example, the tool sets and activity going into the National Space Operations Centre, which is a joint mod space agency initiative, is an example where we're working together. But another good example of burden sharing is the DSIT-led National PNT Office, where some tasks are owned by MOD, other tasks by wider government to deliver the best PNT services we can. There's more to do, but it's a start. Of course, there's the international angle. There's a lot of international colleagues in the audience today, so it's not just about working within the UK government. There's significant cooperation going on in the CISPO between Five Eyes, France and Germany. But how? How do we improve? Well, first of all, talking about it, sharing ideas, working out where the opportunities are and aligning where we can. The more mature we are, the more we spot. Secondly, by asking each and every one of you in industry to help us. Let us know where we're missing opportunities to align our live programs better. We aren't infallible. We won't see everything. We won't even be able to act on everything you spot. Thirdly, it's all well and good to talk about integration with partners, but as we mature, how do we plan to deliver it? So we aim to put in place single cross-government routes to market, working with Cabinet Office, Crown Commercial Services, to deliver more than just contracts, but platforms for working with industry, for working together, helping to identify common goals, needs and joint approaches. Those platforms also allow us to, as the programme matures, as a joint programme that is, buy at scale and repeatably. We aren't there yet, but where we're going as we move from experimentation to operations is where we have to scale up. Fourthly, the right cross-government construct. Skin in the game is important for everyone. Dual-use outputs require multiple inputs, and it isn't all about money. Crowdsourced, non-cash inputs around requirements, skills, facilities, expertise from cross-government bring value to us and you, and it all needs aligning. So in sum, before I hand over to Jason, integration with partners is a necessity, not an option. There are lots of opportunities. All the people on stage working together will give us the best outcomes for the UK. Jason.
Thanks, Paul. And I completely share that sentiment. So there's three points I'd like to make with relation to the topic. The first is the importance, I think, of a coherent message. So we're in an increasingly cost-pressured environment with a growing threat and technology change that's driving increased costs, and we're also in the middle of an SDR. And so it's vital that we, government and industry, develop a coherent message. And I guess I'm coming from the parochial sense of MilSatCom, but I think this applies more generally to the space sector. A coherent message into the decision makers in the central government. And I think we need to work on the narrative around that as well. Secondly, a Skynet specific point. So the Skynet vision is around, and you'll have seen, we'll talk at length about the own collaborate access strategy. So the owned assets, the Skynet 5s and 4s at the moment, and Skynet 6 satellites in the future that are UK government owned, and provide less than 50% of our MilSatCom bandwidth goes through them, because the collaborate pillar, which is about using allied infrastructure on a reciprocal basis, and access, which is about access to our commercial partners, such as OneWeb, and that's become an increasingly vital part of our MilSatCom picture. And the Skynet enterprise constitutes of all three. The future of Skynet needs to be a multi-orbit, multi-band, multi-network hybrid network that dynamically routes traffic between all of those pillars without visibility to the user. And we need to work hand in hand with industry to make that happen. The third point I'd make about the topic is the importance of, so Josh, Mark and I and others on this panel have different incentives. And so it's sometimes difficult for industry to get a common message from government on what our view of the future of the space sector in the UK looks like. And I think it's important for us, for the UK government, to work as one government, to send that coherent message so that industry can make the right investments with an acknowledgement of what we would like UK industry to look like. I think on that topic I'll hand over.
Lovely, thank you. So I work in DSIT, so we're the side or the part of government that leads on the civil space strategy. We work closely with the UK Space Agency, as Paul mentioned earlier. We lead on regulation, international agreements. There's quite a lot of work going on skills, for example. Excuse me, but through the policy strategy function, one of the things we're trying to do is do this join up across government. So it's worth saying that at the moment, in this 3-year period, we've got more money available for space on the civil side than we do on the defence side. We need to understand how that will evolve with the defence review and with the spending review, but it shows the importance of having alignment between the civil side and the defence side working on space. Typically on the space side, and on the civil side, and it's a very kind of gross summary, but we've tended to do R&D that's industry-led. So we've tended to have calls for projects where industry has come forward with ideas for their own products and services, and we've supported them where they pass the tests, and they've gone on to build their business. It's worked well. We've doubled the number of people working in the UK space sector in the last 10 years. We've now got 1,800 space companies in the UK. There's 50% more value generated by the UK space sector. So this is working. But what it's not good at is delivering you specific capabilities. If there's something that you need as a country, you're not going to get that by just supporting industry R&D. You need to be a bit more directive. So the capabilities work that we did with the UK Space Partnership and UK Space Trade Body and academia last year identified 5 areas where there's a clear UK national objective that we want to achieve in space. And we've now got teams of people working on that across government to work out common outcomes, deliver common roadmaps. And once they're agreed and endorsed, that will allow us to orientate all the different funding that we have to support the delivery of those missions. The 5 is space domain awareness. So kind of what's our national ambition in space domain awareness? What is it we're trying to achieve? What do we need to have? Position, navigation and timing. Maybe particularly focused on the timing, but position, navigation and timing, what do we want as a nation? We think we need to do something. So let's kind of get a common one government view on what that would be. SATCOM, we've mentioned SATCOM, but on the civil side, we spend a lot of money through the European Space Agency on civil SATCOM to try and promote a healthy SATCOM sector, but we're not very good at having the technology roadmaps that Paul talked about in terms of making sure that Skynet 7, Skynet 8 has UK-sourced components that do what defence wants. There's not that join up yet. So we need to look at programs like Clio, Artes, how they link in with defence. There's so much turbulence in SATCOM at the minute. If we're not active, there's a danger the UK loses its leadership. In-orbit servicing and manufacturing. So how do we do close proximity operations in space? There's a link there with defence. And space data. That's a huge thing that this government is very interested in. How do we get more value out of all public data, but particularly the data that we collect from space? Excuse me. How do we get value out of that? So that joint excuse me, that joint approach, those roadmaps, those action plans, works underway to deliver those now, and then we will align across government to try and achieve those. It's probably also worth saying that I think this is an area where we're now kind of mature enough to have this approach. So in the past, we haven't had things like Space Command. It's relatively recent. We haven't had DSIT doing strategy. We haven't had significant teams in other parts of government. We now do. So we've now got the governance and the architecture in place to be mature enough to do this work. I think that's really positive. Defence has worked out technologies that they want to be able to source from the UK. So that was published in March. And again, on the civil side, we're now looking at how we could work and align our own funding to deliver those technologies. That's what we need as a country. Let's try and go after it. And then the final thing, the point you were making about the common voice. If you meet us internationally at a conference, you'll start to see us all being around the table together. So in the past, it was probably the case that we annoyed you a bit by having department by department meetings, but now we come as one government. We try and join up across the different parts of UK government, and we're having the same approach with industry. So we will often have meetings with the key industry players where we will all be around the table, and that should help with the clarity of the messaging. Josh.
Fab, thanks. So for me, as head of space in the Department for Business and Trade, there are kind of 4 things that we have to work together on with our cross-government colleagues. So those 4 things are investment, including foreign direct investments, exports, supply chain resilience, and access to capital. And so for us, it's particularly, you can boil it down to the industrial base. I say it more frequently these days across government that the space capabilities that we want don't just walk out of MOD main building or walk out of the UK Space Agency. It's the industry that actually builds them. So while we are doing a lot better in terms of understanding what capabilities we want, what we want to do as a nation, we need as a government to work across our interests. As Jason says, we do have different incentives, we have different levers that we can pull. We need to collectively come together to pull them to get the right industrial base that we need in order to achieve the things that we want to do as a government. So the first kind of priority that DBT works across government on is that investment, is making sure that the business environment is viable as much as it can be for space companies to make those decisions about what technologies, what services they develop here, and the end customers that they work with in the UK. That includes making sure that the business environment is attractive to foreign companies as well. Obviously, within a more geopolitically complex landscape globally, we need to be careful about the kind of companies that we're bringing into our supply chain, not just in terms of making sure that we have assured access to the right technologies and those companies are coming into the UK, share our national interests, but also making sure that the companies that are coming into the UK are adding value to our ecosystem and are not displacing or don't share the interests of the supply chain that they're entering. Second, on exports, if you take out one of the companies that distorts the figures quite a bit, about 2/3 of the revenue in the UK space sector is generated from exports. So that means that the UK space sector is quite heavily dependent on working internationally and working with our allies and partners across civil exports, across defence exports. Only the other day, my team were talking to the Skynet team about the breadth of opportunity already that the Skynet program is seizing with international allies and partners, and we have an ambition to take that even further. But we need to be working across government's interests to ensure that the export agenda, whether it's civil exports, commercial exports, or defence exports, are considered in the programs that we're running, in the support programs that are being delivered by the UK Space Agency or other government departments and other delivery agencies, to ensure that the companies understand what the landscape is, they understand how to go through the export process, especially for a sector where the vast majority of our space companies are quite small. A lot of them are first-time exporters. So we need to make sure that the levers they're accessing to develop their technology is aligned to the support that we provide them to access those markets and those commercial opportunities, those defence opportunities overseas. And DBT has a cross-government remit. We work on both civil exports and defence exports. So we have, obviously myself on the panel here, but we have defence colleagues embedded in DBT who are in the room today and will be for the next couple of days. The third is on supply chain resilience. So that's something that as our sector matures more and as we as a government understand what we want as a government to be able to access, but also what we want the nation to be doing in terms of accessing certain markets, particularly driven by the capabilities that we want to prioritize, we need to be certain that we don't have gaps in our supply chain, that we have resilient supply chains that can bounce back and respond to geopolitical shocks or changes in the geopolitical environment. Thirdly is on access to capital. So again, we know that the space sector is becoming more attractive as an investment destination for capital investors to take equity stakes or support UK companies to grow. But we do also recognise that on the defence side, this has been a challenge in the UK for defence companies or defence adjacent companies to raise capital with private investors. Now that has changed quite a bit over the last couple of years, almost directly as a result of the war in Ukraine. But we know there's still a lot of work to be done. And so when we're thinking about space companies that have both civil and military applications, we're already working across our organisations to see how we can encourage those private investors to put their capital into a company that previously they might not have considered or even been able to invest in because those companies have defence applications. So we're doing a lot of work to understand where in the UK supply chain, where in the UK space sector does private capital play the greatest role, and where do we need it to play a greater role, and what are the levers that we can pull in order to attract that private capital into the UK space sector. So those are the four things that we're already working on across government that are being led out of DBT.
Thank you. So just zooming out for a moment, I think completely in support of pretty much everything that my fellow panellists have said. But space is intrinsically dual use across civil and defence. Defence is often the anchor customer in the background. Certainly in many Five Eyes and other European countries, it will have been the defence customer in the background that has literally got the asset off the ground, so to speak. It's that defence funding that gives critical mass and acts very much as an enabler often to civil and commercial programmes as well. I wanted to dive deep now, well, not that deep, because we can get very, very technical quite quickly, but I just wanted to give an overview of the highly assured capabilities which came out in, being specific here, the National Space Strategy in Action. This is page 36. I know it's hard to navigate all of these different documents, but this page is worth a read. And these are, many of you will be familiar with these, but I just wanted to give them a shout out, spanning antennas and receivers, inter-satellite links, software reconfigurable processing from a SATCOM perspective, TT&C, platform resilience, assembly, test and integration as referred to in the document, data analytics and processing, both from an EO and a space domain awareness perspective, two different sides of the same coin, and sensors both ground-based and on orbit. Should you have any spare R&D money or time to spend, then these are good areas to prioritise. Without a commitment, without a promise of contract, so to speak, but these are areas that have been prioritised, and it would be wise to think about where your IP sits, ideally UK-based, and who's working on these things as you develop them. These have now been updated with more of a pan-government view, which came out in the Space Industrial Plan. As Mark was saying, things added in there include threat and hazard mitigation, software, and of course a very important reference to timing capability and alternative navigation. Lastly, and this echoes what Paul Bate opened with, I think we have a fantastic example of dual use thinking, of cross-government, of one government working with the National Space Operations Centre and Space Domain Awareness. So UK Space Command and UK Space Agency having a similar requirement. I mean, because at the end of the day, avoiding a collision, avoiding debris, or avoiding a malicious, something of malicious intent is a great leveller. Whether you're military or civil, these things are to be avoided. And everyone, it's pretty much as obvious as it gets that we would want to work together in that kind of scenario. So NSPOC is it's a shiny example of working together in this context with the purpose of protecting and defending UK space interests, whether they be civil or defence. And the publication of this, which I would recommend, not for bedtime reading, but just it's a very, very interesting read. It's a great open document that is, well, by definition, easily accessible, and a statement of intent and interest from a UK perspective, particularly on space domain awareness. Great example of working across government.
Matt? I want to say three things, I think, and I've done a couple of these and DSIT and other forums, and I always mention this, and I always mention the first one because, one, I think it's a great dual-use success working together across government, and two, it's actually ongoing, so there are opportunities following on. So I represent Dstl, so I'm fundamentally a technologist at heart, living mainly in the low TRL space. And since 2014, we've been dual using with the space agency. So we've been doing it before it was cool and popular. And in 2018, we launched the Space to Innovate campaign. So if you're not aware about the Space to Innovate campaign, please go and Google it in the break and figure out what we've been doing over the last 5 years, 6 years in the technology space. The reason it's a big dual-use success is it's both funded by the Space Agency and by DSTL and overseen by both, and has been for its whole history. So dual-use, again, as Paul said at the beginning, is not just about exploitation. It's about ins as well as outs. It's about joint funding, joint sponsorship, joint oversight. And in August, we just released the results of the Charlie drop, and we're already sort of planning the Delta drop for next year. So we've already had a number of iterations, over £8 million spent with industry and academia, big success in the dual-use space. Obviously, if we get to a Omega drop, we might be in problems, but until then, I think we're okay. 2035 maybe, I think we'll be okay. The reason it's important is it achieves two aims. It achieves the growth of the industry, but it achieves the growth of the industry in the low TRL space with a defence focus, answering defence challenges.
And because it's quite tightly technically integrated, we then can give exploitation routes into things like space command plans and defense digital activities as well. So we've had some really good successful exploitation into wider mod programs. Moving from the technology, there was a question earlier, I think, in the previous, when Paul was talking about where's the money, right? Is it in technology? Is it in systems? Is it in capability? And I've always seen dual use in three senses, in those three senses, which is you can always innovate at the technology level. You can always apply technology both to civil and defense needs and missions. As it goes up TRL and it becomes mission specific, they tend to diverge and have different requirements and standards and environmental requirements. But the fundamental point is, as it goes up those ladders, the complexity goes up, the money goes up, but potentially the opportunity goes down because you have fewer at the system level and possibly very few if you're talking sort of maybe a national Earth observation capability, which is something that's talked about almost every UK space conference I've been to since about 2014. So the complexity and difficulty and political will and money goes up as you go at the TRL level, technology systems to capabilities or technology missions to capabilities. And people do this. So, in no particular order, looking around Europe, Italy, Germany, and in the US, Canada, in the sort of peer space, they dual use systems and capabilities every day. So I guess the comment is, what can we learn from their approach to one government? What can we learn from their approach to integration, civil, military sphere as well? And a corollary to that is, it's not just dual use. It's not just civil and military. So companies like, Telespazio, they represent Cosmos SkyMed system, which is, they operate a product, that's available on a commercial basis. Other providers are available, of course, but I just happened to be in Rome a couple of years ago to see that. And it struck me that it's not just dual use, it's triple use. Civil, military, commercial, pure commercial. So you can pursue three axes with the same capability. And I think UK should be looking at it like that, learning from allies, because they've been doing this for years. And the point there, and again, the care, I suppose the point about care is integration, yes, but integration with care. So, and I'm speaking from a military perspective, there are elements you need to protect a dual use capability from. The moment your system characteristics, performance, requirements, modes of operations, how much time it takes to get products to a decision maker, they tend to be quite sensitive for military and intelligence applications. When you're designing a system, while you're doing pre-phase A or phase A studies, elements of that information need to protect it quite early in the conversation. So integration, yes. Cross-government, yes. Dual use, yes. But do it with care when you're talking about sensitive stakeholders in defence and intelligence. And I guess the last point is, because this is the last point and the last speaker, is reflecting somewhat in the last couple of years. And the word that's resonated around both Space Agency and Space Command is this concept of a team sport. And I first heard it when Goddard's had a soft launch of Space Command. I think it was 21 or 22. I can't get my years mixed up. A lot of team meetings since then. And this concept of a team sport, as he was explaining it, was in the context of it has to be a team sport because we just don't have enough people. We don't have enough people across the defence operating model for space. And Paul will share some pain, as I will, or the government departments sharing the pain as of growing from a small base. And when you grow from a small base together, parts of your Venn diagram overlap of your responsibilities and your almost your empathy towards other parts of the model to say, well, that's your concerns. I understand that now. Because we operate in a team way, in an overlapping way. And as it grows, as the enterprise grows and we go into more traditional defence operating model roles, the challenge for me is how do you keep that philosophy? How do you keep that team sport mentality and you don't put the borders up in the interfaces and you behave transactionally as potentially other areas of mod do in other domains? How do you keep that philosophy is a really interesting challenge for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. So we'll hand it to Anu to throw some questions at us, but just summarising some of the key themes. We recognise that we need to work together. We recognise we need to do more. We are doing things together. There's always room to improve. But doing more together might mean doing less with industry. There might be less individual things and more big things. That's life. That's how it rolls out. Working together can generate better outcomes for the UK, not just us and our customers. It might generate better outcomes for the UK. For example, exports might prosper due to some crowdsourced ideas. And we've heard about key technologies that are important to work on together. But most importantly, we recognise that actually working together means that we'll deliver the right outcomes for what people are actually asking us for, because we can't do it all on our own. Ali.
Thanks very much, Paul. We've got a plethora of questions that have come flooding in on Slido. We are running slightly ahead of time, so this is great because we're going to be going till 10 past 11. What I'm going to do, Paul, if it's okay, is I'll sort of select the questions and I'll hand to you as chair to dole out who's going to lead in answering them. I just wanted to highlight that generally in one of the pre-preps, one of my colleagues here did say, bring on the difficult questions. I'm not going to say who it was, but Paul, I think you can remember when you're pushing them out.
We'll find out when I dish them out to him.
Yeah. So the first question, and again, if people haven't put anonymous, I hope it's okay. I'll be naming the individual. So it's from Alan Antrobus. The UK Labour Party has outlined 5 key missions that guide its vision for national policy across various sectors. While these missions aren't explicitly targeted at the space sector, how would the panel ensure that space features highly across that government agenda and therefore in translation?
Sounds like a DSIT or DBT one to me.
So obviously the government set these priorities, and we're within each department there's a set of work going on to work out how each department can contribute to the delivery of those, because it's an unusual approach for a government. They haven't set missions by department, they've set cross-government missions, and that forces us to work together. That's unusual, that's different. So you've got groups across government coming together to discuss how they deliver the missions, and then you've got groups within each department. The Space Directorate within DSIT, we're feeding into the work that's going on within DSIT to emphasise how space does play a role to all of those. The role is stronger probably in the grow the economy. It's probably a little bit harder on safer streets or NHS, but we have something to say in all of those because space is used so widely. But the economic growth, the underpinning nature of space, the way that we support so many other capabilities, all of the CNI sectors, all of these are the points that we're feeding in so people can understand just how important space is to underpin and deliver everything else the government is trying to do.
Anyone else want to add anything?
The only thing I'll add is that particularly for the growth mission, as Marcus said, I think we all recognise that's probably, of the 5 missions, that's probably the one that we can make a very strong, the strongest case for space in the cross-government missions. One of the key enablers of that mission for growth that the Labour Party and the government set out before the election and have since confirmed that they are in the process of developing it is the industrial strategy. And this goes to the points I was making about all the 4 priorities that I set out are about supporting the industrial base, and the industrial strategy is one of those key enablers of the growth mission that we have done quite a lot of work across government, across the agencies, across the core departments to make that case that space is a high growth, high potential sector and therefore needs its place within the industrial strategy in order to support the growth mission, but also that there are challenges and opportunities, but there are challenges within the sector at the moment, in the global sector, that something like an industrial strategy will take the opportunity to try and address so that we can achieve the high growth, high potential that space already has within the UK, but also turbocharge that effectively and deploy levers that might not have been available to the sector in order to make it grow more consistently at an extremely high level. It's already growing very strongly within the UK, but we do want to match the kind of global growth of the space sector, and we have seen that accelerate quite significantly over the last few years. And so in order to really make that case that space can contribute to the mission for growth, but also that space can benefit from the mission for growth, that's the pitch that we've been putting into the industrial strategy and the mission for growth already.
Okay, thank you. I've got 2 questions, one named and one anonymous, but I want to put these ones here because I think they are really looking at the challenges of actual delivery beyond the strategic frameworks that we establish. First one is from Marcus Adcock from UK Stratcom. How do we ensure that collaboration does not slow us down given different incentives, which is a dynamic that's not necessarily concerning some adversaries? Where should we be taking risk? So with different incentives at play from different organisations in partnerships, how do we ensure that we're not getting slowed down because of those disparate priorities?
Yeah, so I'll maybe start. So if we're going to collaborate, we need to make sure we've really genuinely got a common baseline. Collaborating on Earth observation is fine, but if the mod requirement drives a level of complexity and cost into the program because it's actually fundamentally different to the civil requirement, then it's collaboration in name only. So we need to make sure there's a genuine baseline, otherwise we will get slowed down. In terms of making sure we make the right decisions and where to innovate, I think what we need to do is innovate on getting platforms out there. Sorry, what we don't need to do is innovate necessarily on getting platforms out there. What we need to innovate on is how we use the data and how we generate value from that data and the use cases we put the data to. Because we're very good at innovating on new ways to collect data. What we're not very good at is innovating on new ways to use the data we have. I don't know if anyone else wants to... Any points?
There's one that, just because it's something I did historically, is to turbocharge the collaboration, you need to demonstrate value. So for me, there's a big, push to. I'm being a bit defence specific this view, but in terms of pushing that collaboration and taking some more risk in space from a defence perspective, you have to have advocates from other domains. It can't just be space people saying space is great. You need to have the advocacy. You need to show the demonstration, the benefit. And, the Tyche mission is a great opportunity to do that, to show that it can do for you. And therefore, when you get advocacy, you get collaboration. And that's mainly a defence view, but I think that same applies, demonstrating benefit to growth, demonstrating benefit to trade. Once you get that advocacy and a visceral demonstration of that, I think that collaboration gets unlocked.
I'd like to talk to the risk point. So increasingly space is increasingly contested, and so the risk that we face from our adversaries is growing quickly. And I've seen defence change its posture in how it approaches commercial and financial risk, and where it's prepared to take more risk in those spaces in order to reduce that military capability risk. And that's been quite refreshing to see over the last few years. Actually, it's been very exciting change in how it's approached procurement, and I think that's been the same in DNS as well.
Okay, thanks, Jason. You've actually answered one of the other questions that was coming up, which is about getting more intelligent and more effective dual-use capabilities from the civ and the mil side. I want to go to a broader question from Dahita Govinji from PA Consulting. Jason mentioned the need for UK government to send a coherent message to industry. How is government working together to achieve this and to ensure that industry can respond appropriately?
So, I don't know, I mean, I can start, and we've probably all got something to say about that. So, the main way that government is working together to achieve that is trying to crowdsource those requirements, trying to work out where the areas of commonality are, where the genuine things we can do together are, but also more important, where the genuine things that we can't do together are, because there'll always be things that we just can't collaborate on. So understanding each other's needs. We've heard about the NSPOC today. I spoke about it. I think Mel spoke about it. I think Josh even spoke about it as well. That's a really good example of where we identify something that we could do together, where there was actually a common fundamental set of requirements. What we then need to do is make sure we share them appropriately with industry, and make sure industry know that it might be me fronting something, but it's actually on behalf of joint cross-government, or it might be DSIT funding something, but it actually has exploitation into mod, because often we aren't necessarily good at telling that entire story and where these requirements are coming from and where they're going to. So it then becomes about communication and stakeholder management, and make sure that everyone understands how we are all actually working together and spotting those opportunities. I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in with anything.
So one of the obvious ways government communicates its intent is through strategies. So we had the National Space Strategy a few years ago. But one of the challenges we got back from the sector was that the breadth of the strategy was so broad or so wide that it was actually quite difficult to understand what our priorities were. Excuse me, as a government, what is it we were going to move on first? Were we going to try and develop this capability on page 10 versus that capability on page 20? And it was quite difficult. There wasn't a clear way for industry to align with us and work with us to deliver it because of that breadth. So the choice of 5 capabilities where we've said these are the things we're going to work on now. We'll carry on with the capabilities we've already got in hand. So NSPOC will carry on and the spaceflight program will carry on. But these are 5 areas now that we're going to focus on that was partially to respond to that challenge from the industry, that they didn't know how we were going to engage with them or what we were going to focus on. So the idea is that those 5 give the sector the ability to understand what we're going to move on, where the grant programs will come from and what we will buy, so that they can be ready with us, ready to work with us to deliver them.
Just to add 2 extra points. So in addition to the capabilities that were set out in the Space Industrial Plan, one of the key commitments from the government was to work more strategically with key industry partners in the supply chain. And so some of the people in this room representing some of the companies will already have seen, and I think Mark alluded to it already, that we have changed the way in which core departments and delivery agencies are engaging with particular companies that have a particular role within the supply chain, typically towards the top, because they have their ability to impact the ecosystem, the wider supply chain is much, much higher than any one individual SME within the supply chain. And so we have deployed that model, that cross-government model where, as Mark says, you literally have the senior leadership across the departments, across the core delivery agencies, sat round the table with the decision makers of these larger companies, large international companies as well, bringing in not just the company's UK leadership, but their international leadership as well, so that their parent organisations, because we are quite an open and internationally facing space sector, we're quite welcoming of international companies where appropriate, of course, and so bringing that international leadership of those companies into those discussions provides them with the reassurance that their UK entity, their UK arm of their business in the UK space sector is working closely with the UK government across their interests. The other aspect that I would point to in terms of how we're delivering a coherent message is, I think we already referenced it, is the consolidation of government requirements for space data and information through the Crown Commercial Service. So there was a lot of work that went into across governments to actually designing what that framework would need to do, the need for it. And one of those needs was that the government needed to provide, as coherent as possible, a view of what the government wants to buy and what the government wants to procure and what the different requirements are across the organisations and where we as government can extract the greatest value for money. Now, for industry, it's not unheard of for companies to try and sell the same thing 3 or 4 times to different departments. But the Crown Commercial Service framework is a way of, for us as government, providing a singular voice as to what are the government's requirements, what is the baseline that these companies need to achieve, all of them that sign up to this framework, in order to work and access these government contracts and these opportunities to work with government. So that's a really strong way that we have only in the last few years made quite a significant step forward to cohere that government messaging of what do we actually want to buy and how are we going to use space data and information.
And go on.
I just wanted to add one short point. So I talked earlier about incentives, and I think one thing I've seen from this government is effort to align the incentives between the different departments. And I realise there's a danger that we're all answering this question and we don't say the same thing. But I think we have said the same thing, and the government has been. And if I take an example on Skynet. Previously, within the delivery agent, there was less incentive from the MOD to support the Skynet export agenda. It was an incentive, clearly, from DMT to do that. And I've seen effort from the incentive from MOD was such that the export agenda would draw effort away from the delivery of the military capability. I've seen effort from this new government to align the incentives between different departments. I think that answers directly to the question of how government is changing its approach.
Yeah. And maybe I'll just finish off this question by... It's probably obvious to a lot of you, but where we are now, we're at the end of what you could suggest is the first phase of delivery, certainly for Space Command. We're beginning the journey on the second phase, so looking at what we've done and doing and working out how to build up, scale out. That's the opportunity. So that's where the jam tomorrow is, of where that true jointness is, because we've worked out what it is we need to do. And so picking up on Josh's points and where those areas of commonality and common requirements come in, we've had a bit of time to work out where we need to be in isolation, but now we're working out where we need to be together, and we need to communicate that.
just one final point on this, because it is more of a call for action, because it sounds like we've got it all worked out, and we don't. We're still keen to hear the views of industry and academia, because they play a key role in creating and developing and researching new technologies, of course. But with this new government, we are going through a comprehensive spending review, our multi-year budget setting exercise, a strategic defence review, and we're developing a brand new industrial strategy all at the same time, which hasn't happened in well over a decade. Probably the last opportunity that we had as a government to do this was when the Conservatives first came into power in 2010. All of those key strategic imperatives will either have or will have at some point public consultations, the ability for industry to input their views as to what are the priorities for each of them, what they should be, and for the space sector, what does the industry, what does the sector want to see the government doing in all three of them for the space sector. Now, as I said, some of those public consultations are already open. I think the Strategic Defence Review closes pretty soon, so get your submissions in soon. But we want to hear, it's all well and good us thinking we've got a coherent message, but we want to hear from industry if that is the case, and we want to hear the sector telling us how we can improve across our departments, how using all three of those very important multi-year activities, how can you provide the same coherent message across all three of them to ensure that all three of those activities are getting the same message from the sector? So that's more of a call for action to the sector to be inputting and providing us with that ongoing engagement, of course, with our respective departments. But those three key activities, the opportunity to do all three of these at the same time, and for the sector to speak with a single voice and say and talk coherently across the different opportunities and challenges, does not come around often. So it really is kind of now that we need the sector to continue providing feedback to us whether we're doing the right thing or not.
Can I just add on that? It's hard to find one particular point to contact into, so to speak. So I just wanted to mention something called the Space Enterprise Community, which tries to cover all of the regions within the UK. So that is a good place to try and feed stuff into, a single point, so to speak, which we can collect and feed through. So Space Enterprise Community.
Okay, excellent. Let's get ourselves on to the next question.
Yeah, I've got three that I'm going to group together, because I think it opens up now into, we've talked a lot, I mean, the way I'm framing it, we've talked a lot about within our sector, and I think many of us have had concerns that sometimes we are talking to ourselves. So how do we look outside for maximal impact, especially when we're looking at what I think of as higher level sort of like transversal capabilities that exist? Two targeted questions. So very briefly, the first one, it's from Anonymous, but it's for you, Mel, from a sort of Catapult perspective. What role can neutral entities such as Catapult play in enabling the narrative of one government, one space in their unique position, perhaps closer to industry? This question has been edited slightly, so that nuance was mine. So
Okay. So the narrative of a
neutral entity.
Yeah.
How can you enable this one government, one space narrative better on behalf of industry, given your closeness and intermediary position with industry?
Yes, absolutely. So I think in terms of being as throwing the net as wide as possible and being as inclusive as possible, collecting and summarising, because this is a hard job, right, to understand industrial capability en masse across the UK. So I think that's where we can help. The neutrality, the confidentiality, the firewalling, and collating and feeding information back in. I think that's where we can most obviously help in the first instance. And we did this on some of the highly assured capabilities in recent history, and I think that worked quite well. But it's like painting pick a bridge, whichever devolved area we're in, pick a bridge. It's like painting a very large bridge to keep up to date with industrial capability, because it's moving, some of it will be on a steady track and some of it will be moving very, very quickly. So a full-time job there, I think.
Thanks, Mel. I'm going to go to the broader question. So again, Paul, if you can field this, and then we'll come to a targeted one. Questions from Alan Cross at STFC. How does the UK ensure that its space sector is benefiting from capabilities or strengths in other sectors? What barriers are there to traditionally non-space organisations addressing space opportunities? And how do we ensure that we're open to new voices, perspectives and innovation? So tapping into that much broader science and innovation landscape that space is just one part of.
So there's obviously a DSGL angle here, so I'll maybe let Matt come in a second. But adding to what Mel just said around space catapult and the value, I think there's also the need, and this links into the question you just asked as well, Annie, for people such as Space Catapult to keep us honest, help us spot those opportunities, tell us when we're getting it wrong, because we're not seeing everything, we're not close to the detail, we haven't got the same level of technical context that people in the Space Catapult will have. But then playing directly into your question as well, we won't necessarily do the horizon scanning either. There's a DSGL role there, but even DSGL aren't able to cover all the bases, and that's where the Space Catapult comes in. So we're really relying on industry to be open with us, to tell us where those opportunities exist, and to do that horizon scanning themselves. Matt, I don't know if you want to talk about what DSGL traditionally do in this space.
Yeah, I suppose I'll just pick a few areas really. So DSTL has a role in basically describes itself in 22 different areas. One is space, obviously land, air, maritime, and then sensing, materials, etc. So we have very good networks, academic, industrial networks through those different areas. And one thing we are looking more to do, and part of the reason we haven't done this particularly well over the years is space is quite small and we've been directed to command priorities, is to look a little bit further future, figure out where our strengths are. This is in the defence context more specifically, but linking to things like the other catapult centres, the manufacturing technology centres, all the places where industrial strengths are, but we have relationships with them in the defence context. And I'm not going to say the word spacify, but I will say the words. How do we spacify what they do for growth and defence advantage? So that's one aspect of that. And there is another aspect in where a DSTL using industry and academia to push the grounds on those enabling technologies. So the sensing technologies, let's do the AI thing because no one said AI yet, right? The AI, quantum, all the good stuff that we've got really, really good emerging capabilities and links with. How do we pull that into quantum in space, AI in space? The things people say, but again, be specific and be in the defense context, how we link with all those networks. DSTL is basically a really good network of networks.
Don't know if anyone else wants to add anything or if you want me to. No?
I mean, I'll mention that particularly for DBT, focusing on the trade agenda, the clue is in the name. We do quite a bit of work with the sector to help them understand where the market demand is. And yes, there is demand for. There are customers that need space systems and payloads and actual satellites, but particularly when it comes to data and information, a lot of those customers don't really care where it comes from, as long as it provides for their requirements. They have a requirement for data and information, and they don't really care where it comes from. What DBT end up having to do a reasonable amount with the UK space sector is sort of coach UK space companies into thinking about it that way, rather than jumping straight into a technical discussion about return rate and aperture, etc., etc. Okay, that has its place in commercial discussions and discussions about how you can provide for a customer's requirements. But as a business, as a commercial prospect, starting from the technical aspects is not what procurement leads and end customers, particularly internationally, especially in countries where they don't really have large space sectors, and therefore their technical understanding of space technologies is not huge. But the market demand is there. We do end up supporting the space sector quite a bit in sort of changing that mentality and thinking more about, okay, how do we run this as a business rather than a space rather than a space technology provider? It is a bit of a nuance, but it is, if we want the UK space sector to tap into those commercial markets and make money off of space, then we need them to think about running their organizations and running their businesses as a business and addressing end customer requirements, not coming up with the most highly technical, highly capable capability. If it's not the cheapest or the most cost effective, those end customers are not going to buy it. And so there is that kind of mentality shift that, yes, the space sector is doing some fantastic work and developing some incredible technology and incredible services, but to make it more commercially viable, more commercially focused, we need the space sector. We need more of the space sector to look at providing business solutions, for particularly using data and information derived from space, provide more business solutions, and they need to provide them at scale, because there are huge customer requirements with huge organizations globally, whether it's oil and gas or climate change monitoring, or food and agri-tech. There are some large contracts out there that we need the UK space sector to go after, but we need those companies within the UK to think bigger and think more commercially, come together to be greater than some of their parts, in order to sell themselves as a business solution rather than some high-tech spacified company.
So maybe I'll just finish off picking up on what Josh said. So it's also incumbent on industry to help with this, because a common characteristic of certainly defence programmes and wider government programmes are large capital investments where we don't pick those emergent technologies and make a whole part of it. So we rely on industry to look for the technology opportunities where we can pull through non-spacey things into space. So as much as it's down to us to communicate what those needs are, it's also down to industry to understand where the opportunities may be too. So we need your help as well as that.
So that's actually really helped me, because weaving together your answer, Josh, and Paul, your perspective just now, there's a relevant question here. This is from Anuradha Demal from the Satellite Applications Catapult. There are currently 15 space clusters as part of the UK space ecosystem across the UK, all understanding the nuances of their localities and providing more specific knowledge about their local industry. I just want to caveat that as well, because many of those space clusters were established where they were because of capabilities far broader than space. So how can we leverage these better? Because it's a key part of our strategic armoury. I get the impression from this question that there's a sense of untapped potential there and urgency. So, Paul, I'll let you feel that one further. Our space cluster.
Has anyone got any strong views on that one to start off?
So, I mean, we recognise the importance of the clusters, because they are starting to specialise and develop their own niches, their own niche specialisms, which is really valuable, because you get a certain scale if you can specialise that enables you to really become expert in certain areas. So if you combine Ministry of Defence's list of technologies that we want to achieve in the UK, if you combine it with the sense that we've got a bit more prioritisation around what capabilities we want as a country, I think it enables the centres, the clusters around the country, to start to identify which of those they're best placed to serve. We can move to a situation where funding that government offers for clusters can be in support of something other than the growth of the cluster. You can actually start to task them with specific outcomes or ask them to develop specific technologies so that we can go back and tick them off and make sure we're actually achieving what we want to achieve in terms of technologies. Does that kind of fit?
Yeah, excuse me, absolutely. Sorry. Just to feed into that and reiterate, we are, thanks Matt, we are looking at connected capability networks at the moment, and there is actually a defence one that's coming out at the moment that will focus on specific technical areas and join the dots between different parts of the UK, different clusters regionally.
So I was going to make a similar point, that it's great that we've got a number of clusters developing local intelligence, local capability. But again, if we lift our gaze and we think internationally, the UK space sector as a whole is smaller than some of the individual US state level space sectors. So when it's internally within the UK, and this kind of goes to the point earlier about the UK talking to the UK and the sector talking to the sector. Internally, the clusters are definitely very good at identifying local strengths, and as you said, Anu, connecting to non-space strengths and capabilities in their locales. But when it comes to delivering on the bigger opportunities, and for example, some of the MOD programs are quite significant, we need the UK sector as a whole to be delivering at scale, and sometimes that isn't quite possible in any one individual cluster. And so, as Melanie says, more connections between the clusters will be helpful, not just in the UK space sector coming together to deliver on larger programs within the UK, but certainly internationally. I spend a lot of time with international investors. the discussion about the clusters comes quite far down the line. It's the initial understanding of the UK space sector is at the very macro level, especially when you're looking at Europe, which in and of itself is broken down into dozens of national space sectors. When we're trying to convince international investors that the UK is the best place to come and the best place to do business in the space sector, we are competing with, on a commercial basis, with other European countries globally. And so pitching the UK as a connected, an interwoven, connected ecosystem across that is made up of clusters, but comes together but the clusters come together to be greater than some of their parts. That is a stronger sell. That is a stronger message. And so that's where the work the Catapult we're already doing, that I think is being supported by the UK Space Agency and others in government to create that connected ecosystem, is how the clusters can come together to be greater than the sum of themselves within their clusters. But then the clusters between the clusters, we need them to think at a higher level.
Yeah, I think there's also a point around duplication. Can we afford to have clusters duplicating different capabilities around the country? So we've got 1,800 space companies. Most of them are very, very small, and they may have a niche product, they may have a niche offering, but to scale up and become something that would offer a real difference to the UK industrial landscape, we probably need consolidation. So lots of people are talking around the consolidation in different sectors. It doesn't feel like it's starting yet, but I think it would probably be difficult for government to encourage and stimulate the clusters just to duplicate skill sets that are elsewhere. I think they need to specialise, and I think that goes hand in hand with thinking about whether the industrial landscape in the UK needs to consolidate a bit more as well.
Okay. The final point I'd add is that often the clusters add value to themselves as well, around working together and identifying more local opportunities and local ways of being better, as much as something we need to exploit into wider programs. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. Next question.
Thanks. We've got time for two more questions. Just looking, we're about 6 minutes left. I'm going to pick one of them because it follows on you, Matt. You opened up the issue of, you brought quantum into the discussion and AI. I'm going to carry on with that because this question actually reflects a number of questions that have come up. In a nutshell, dual use is essential, but cybersecurity is currently treated separately. Is there any intention to manage the cybersecurity across all domains in a more joined-up approach across government? And this is something which I know is being addressed at granular levels, but it's coming out from question after question, and I think it's a massive challenge for us. So really grateful for your perspective.
So that's quite a difficult question to answer. Under mod principles, secure by design has us manage system security at a whole system level. The principles being that if you manage it at a whole system level, pushing those systems together delivers a sum of a secure system that's better than or equal to the parts. How that is then governed, certainly across the entirety of the space domain, it is somewhat of a challenge. But it's one we're biting off slowly through policy. Now, I don't have a specific answer to the broad question answered, other than reflecting mod secure by design approaches. I don't know if any of my other panelists have got anything they wanted to say on that.
If my voice will hold. I think there's a groundswell of activity happening anyway from an organic perspective. So, and what we may find is that commercial requirements actually get us most of the way there, and there may be something in that a way to meet halfway, so to speak. Because we seem to have, and I don't want to generalise, but we seem to have cyber essentials plus, and that's great. And you know, it can be rolled out very widely, and then a bit of a gap. But I think commercial will get us much of the way there. Commercial standards.
Okay. Anyone else?
So 2 points. One, I think there is work ongoing to deepen the relationship, particularly between government departments, the delivery organisations working on space, and the National Cybersecurity Centre. So we see quite a bit of it from companies approaching us, asking us, what kind of IT systems should we be buying? What laptops should we be buying if we want to work with the MOD in the future. Now, that's not within the purview of DBT to say, yes, buy these, I'm not going to name any brands, buy these laptops and don't buy these ones. However, there is advice and there are programs, I think some of them that Melanie mentioned are run out of the National Cybersecurity Centre, but there are experts that are available to provide that kind of support and advice on an individual basis. Is there more that we could be doing at policy level, especially if we're talking about how do we embrace and support the opportunities that the dual use nature of the sector brings? Potentially, maybe. But as I said earlier in my kind of call to action, if that is something that is prevalent across swathes of the industry, to Melanie's point, if the industry is saying that this is what we need, that we need clearer guidance and clearer support in making our systems secure, because we may not be operating as a military application, but we can be seen as a military adjacent, or we can be seen to have military applications. If the industry can tell us that and tell us where those challenges are through those three consultations and activities that I mentioned, then that is something that we can look at. But there is work already in train, particularly with the National Cybersecurity Centre, and I believe that UK Space Agency are working closely with them. And I expect UK Space Command to be as well. But as I said, if there is more that can be done, then those three big peace events that are happening across government now is the opportunity to say so.
And that is happening, the NCSC stuff. Scaling it to an enterprise level is a challenge, but maybe we'll move on to next question.
Okay, we've got 120 seconds left, so this is the final question, weaves everything together, and it's going to be short fire responses from each of you. From Lewis Fielder at Deloitte, there's going to be lots of sectors vying for priority in the government's new industrial strategy. How confident are you that space will indeed be prioritised? Because this weaves together the comms piece, the strategic platforming and messaging. So very short answers, please, looking at the clock, colleagues.
So I can't prejudge the outcome of the defence review, but space is important. A large amount of the UK economy is space-oriented. We've come a long way in the last 4 years. There's more to go. I don't think we're going to be deprioritised.
I'm confident for three reasons. The pace of technology change that means we need that investment, the growing threat environment that means that we need that investment, and the export opportunities that we get from building the sector that means that we need that investment as well.
So, I think you've already seen the DSIT ministers on the civil side say and explain the importance of space. It's really helpful. The first thing our Secretary of State did was go to Farnborough and speak about space. The first event he did as the Secretary of State. The first speech Minister Bryant gave was on space. He's Joint Minister with Telecom, so he's already trying to understand the links between SATCOM and terrestrial and rolling out connectivity across the UK. The interesting thing is that they came into government understanding space. So they arrived and we didn't have to kind of do the basic briefing. This was an administration that was meeting lots of space companies beforehand. They understand it. So I'm pretty confident that space will get a very fair hearing.
I'm also fairly confident.
Thank you, John. Mel?
It's essential critical infrastructure. So I would be very hopeful.
Last word, Matt.
Space is really cool. we don't use that enough. You know, people in government, people in this room, nephews, sons, uncles think space is cool. Let's play that more.
Thank you very much. We are aligned on this. Colleagues, thank you. We are bang on time. Before I have one parish notice to read before we break for coffee. But can we first of all thank our panellists for really setting clearly the challenges and opportunities. Yes. One space, one government.